Good morning, my name is Salman Hussain. I am the coordinator of something called TEEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity. The Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity is an initiative which was founded about 10 years ago, which is aimed at trying to mainstream biodiversity and ecosystem services into decision making, so that it becomes part of the discourse, so that the valuation of ecosystems and biodiversity becomes important, because typically we find that valuation has a very significant impact on decisions overall. I have been involved, I'm a staff member of the United Nations Environment Programme. I'm based in Geneva, and we've been working on natural capital accounting within UNEP more generally, but within TEEB, the initiative more specifically, for very many years. And the reason we've been doing that is because in the end, the mandate for the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, is to basically conserve the world's environment and its ecosystems and provide livelihoods for people so that we can actually support environmental protection. So in that regard, natural capital accounting is absolutely core, because what natural capital accounting does in practice is help us measure. Now, in the end, what we want to achieve is outcomes and impacts associated with what we're doing, but we need to first measure where we are to start with. And what we haven't as a natural capital accounting is, particularly natural capital accounting in the context of SEA, the System of Environmental Economic Accounting, is a statistical standard, I'd say the only statistical standard, which allows us to do that. So there's a coherence in a way that, say, for instance, Stats South Africa, but equally other statistical offices around the world, will look at this experimental standard and say, this is how we're looking at the benefits that ecosystems provide in the form of ecosystem services. We're using this typology. This is how we're deciding on whether this is a forest or this is a different type of agricultural cover or land cover or land use. We need that standardization. And apart from that standardization, what we also need is to have data to say, how we've been doing, how we've been performing. We have information which tells us that, for instance, the extent of our native forest has been declining. So we need to have that and have that authenticated, rubber stamped by statisticians, those who are charged with the very business of making sure that our data are correct. So UNEP has been very keen to partner and to work on this work stream in terms of SEA, the experimental accounts, because we need to have the notion of understanding what data are there, what the trends have been historically, and therefore where specifically would it be sensible for UNEP, its partners, civil society groups, etc., to actually intervene in the process to improve livelihoods, improve conservation outcomes. And so we need to measure before we can act, and that's really what the SEA and our involvement in SEA has been about.
Okay.
Natural capital accounting enables scenario analysis in the sense that we need to, what is a scenario to start with? When we talk about scenario analysis, we're projecting forward. So of course, when policymakers are informed of or themselves are pushing for a particular agenda and a particular change, they want to look at positive interventions going forward compared to what would happen if we didn't do anything. So we can call that alternative scenario business as usual. Now, the thing is that even if we don't intervene, and business as usual, with business as usual, things happen anyway. So it may well be with certain trends, for instance, we have increased deforestation, or we have over-abstraction of water, and those are trends we know about, and we know about them because we know that we can project forward in terms of population demographics, income variability, urbanization, impacts of climate change, etc. going forward. So we know that there's a kind of business as usual scenario which will take us probably to some kind of point in the future. Now, when we talk about scenario analysis, saying, look, we've got that as a baseline. That particular baseline leads to a certain outcome or series of outcomes in terms of human livelihoods, in terms of communities and individuals and how they benefit or to what extent they depend on and impact upon ecosystems, and then the effect in terms of ecosystems in and of themselves. Okay, so are ecosystems still resilient? Can they still provide the benefits that we require of them, so to speak, as humans? And can they still provide us with the ability to enjoy the intrinsic beauty, intrinsic value of nature that we prize globally? So what we're trying to do is build a scenario which looks as an alternative to that. So how does natural capital accounting fit in? Well, it fits in for two reasons. The first thing is that if we're first trying to decide where we ought to intervene, What we haven't as natural capital accounting is a situation where we, for instance, might get trends on deforestation. And that may well prompt us to think, well, we're in 2019, we've got to this point, we're at this point where basically we see deforestation trends, we know that's important, or we might have increases in invasive species, any manner of different things that we find to be problematic. And that might create a trigger where a policymaker says, okay, I get this trend is important, I've discovered this trend because the data coming from natural capital accounting, I, the decision maker, would like to do something about it. And that decision maker needn't just quote unquote be the minister. It could be, say, for instance, community groups, it could be businesses. So we're working more and more on this project and overall natural capital accounting with the business community, particularly with the Natural Capital Coalition. So any number of different stakeholders and agencies could be interested in these data. So how does NCA fit in? Number one, it gives us the spark. It says, look, we need to do something about this. How does it then input into scenario analysis? Well, you know, the common phrase used obviously is garbage in, garbage out. If we start with a situation where we're very data poor and we don't know really what the baseline is, then we're basically fumbling in the dark. We know we need to do something, but we don't really know where we're starting from. And clearly with NCA, we have a better idea because of the structure and nature and how the data are collected to tell us what our starting point is. And then when we use future projection modeling, using tools like what we use in the literature, like INVEST, modeling, etc., and then we apply valuation. I'm an environmental economist by training. We can then do that more robustly, more rigorously, and with more a feeling that we've got a better place to make a judgment about whether a scenario is better or worse if we have the natural capital accounting in place in the first place. I think one of the most striking lessons that other countries could learn from South Africa is really the way in which, particularly through the project that I'm involved in, there has been the interaction between Stats SA and SAMBI. Now, these are the two key partners. There's a technical committee which includes many other stakeholders as well. But what we have found in terms of this project is that the project has quote-unquote forced entities to come together in a way that maybe they hadn't done so before. And I think in terms of South Africa, that isn't quite the case. There is a history of involvement of linkages between Stats SA and with SAMBI. But it is the case, having spoken to those at the coalface who do the day-to-day work in this project, that interaction has been really magnified as a consequence of this project. Partly because the funding is there to do so, partly because there's a push in terms of the technical inputs coming from the UN agencies, but also a desire to take natural capital accounting forward. So one of the key things we can learn is that what happens in terms of success in terms of natural capital accounting, if you're trying to mainstream, you really need to bring different partners together. And that can be really challenging at times. So in other countries I've been in, we've been in situations where our inception workshops, maybe sometime in 2017, 2018, would be literally the very first time where senior officials within the National Bureau of Statistics had met with, for instance, senior officials in Ministry of Environment or equivalent. Even bringing those different agencies together is really important. We've also found that in particular, not particularly in South Africa, but other countries, we've learned that there's a situation where certain ministries can be very much hoarding of their data. And what we found is we've learned, I think, from South Africa's experiences, that there's been a really good mechanism through the technical committees and discussions to move us away from the situation where a particular line ministry says, these are our data, you're not getting them, and these are the ones we're using. And I think that doing this in the context of natural capital accounting, streamlined, taken forward by Stats South Africa, but also with SAMBI, I think has been really critical. So I think that other countries in that respect can learn in terms of the interaction between agencies, which has been much, much smoother here in South Africa than it has been, I think, in the majority of our other countries we work in.